13, 12, 11, 10.
The things I go through to give this game the proper attention it deserves. Though seriously, from what I gathered, To the Moon has to be one of the most underrated games of all time. To be honest, I suppose I'm not that surprised. If I hadn't heard that it had an autistic character in it, I might have also never checked it out either. Still, I'm glad that I did. For all the little hype it does get, it really does live up to its title of being one of the best love stories in video games, and is well deserving of its Gamestop Game of the Year award in 2011. I mean, after all, where do you think the phrase "ship it to the moon" came from? So the game begins with our two leads, a pair of scientists having crashed into a tree after creating roadkill on their way to their next client, a man on his deathbed named John. See, in this game's not too distant future, I guess a bunch of scientists really were inspired by the movie Inception because they had devised a way to travel into a person's mind and alter their memories. However, unlike Leo and his magic top, the process turns out to be extremely dangerous. Something about messing with a person's mind can make it literally explode or something, I don't know. Because of this, it can only be used commercially on the old and the dying who have an unfulfilled wish. Anything you ever wanted to do? Anything you ever wanted to be? Granted. Want to be a rock star? Marry the cheerleader? Become a cowboy? The sky's the limit. The only catch, aside from the price, is that you'll more or less die after you lived out your fantasy. Definitely makes for a lot of neat commentary I'll get into later. But first, we meet some of the brains behind the technology. Our two main lead scientists for this story, Neil and Eve. Think of them more as sort of the straight man or woman and the goofball. Eve is much more a straightforward game planner, who always takes things seriously while finding pleasure in putting Neil down whenever he's goofing off. Not that Neil's not serious when he needs to be, but he's far more the comedic relief of the story, which, despite this being a drama, has some hilarious moments in it as well. But there's no time to waste, as we are introduced to John's caretaker, Lily and her kids, who, after some fierce negotiation, takes Neil and Eve around the property. When suddenly... and just the comedy. Even if it's a tease that it was going to be something like Final Fantasy, this game is just a riot at times. Although, this does make me have to bring up the weakest element of the game, the gameplay itself. Unlike many other popular PC or video games in general, you don't really get to do a lot of gaming. See, how the game works is that you travel throughout it with Neil and Eve, collecting various items to travel back inside John's memory, and in between these links, as they call them, you have to solve puzzles and occasionally play in a minigame. Yet if anything, these games feel more like a distraction from the story rather than entertainment. I first experienced To the Moon on a Let's Play, and when the story got near the end, I remember actually moaning when I realized we'd have to solve another puzzle, or play an obstacle course just to continue on. And unlike games like The Walking Dead or Undertale, nothing you do changes the outcome. No matter what attack you use on the squirrel, the game still plays out as it had before. So, does this make it a bad game just because the gaming element isn't good? I wouldn't say that. I once heard someone describe the game as either a very long movie or a short novel that, instead, chose to become a video game. And while I honestly guess I could see the story working better in either of those mediums, what makes it worth it having been made into a video game is its music and visual appeal. I mean, just look at it. I honestly think that it's some of the best, not just for a PC game, but for any games in general. Heck, I even say this game's graphics and music could go hand in hand with something like Skyrim or Final Fantasy. But back to the actual story itself. One trip around the place, finding origami rabbits, lighthouses, watching gorgeous backdrops along with the various forms of foreshadowing, and...
He's Perry! Perry the Platypus! You can call him Agent P. Perry! I say you can call him Agent P. Agent P!
that thing, Eve and Neil are ready to enter into John's mind.
Guys, we're about to journey into the most horrifying, disturbing place any of us have ever been.
Their first stop is with John's last memory before he went into a coma, as the true scientist explains how the procedure works. See, they don't actually, quote-unquote, I really need to get a movable OC one day, change one's memory. Instead, they simply move around a few things at a certain point in one's life to motivate them to fulfill their dreams. Let's think of it like this. You know how, when you were a kid, you probably wanted to become a superhero, president, firefighter, or I suppose astronaut was also pretty popular before Gravity came out. However, you then moved on from that interest to something else, or just didn't put in the real time and sacrifice it would have taken to make that happen? Well, what these guys do is change your past self to keep that motivation throughout your entire life, therefore achieving your dream with the help of your own memories, along with additional information from the web. So with that, it helps if you know what your motivation was to fulfill your dream, and in John's case, you know, buddy, there is a simpler way to get to the moon.
People were trying to work. Yeah, well now space!
Or if destroying the world doesn't float your boat. With John's want to go to the moon unclear, Neil and Eve latch onto one time object after another as we begin our little travel back in time. But first stop, John's golden years, where we meet the reason why I'm here in the first place, his wife, River. We will learn that it was supposedly her dream to have a house built where John currently lives. However, when she developed cancer, it came down to John being unable to afford both building the dream house while paying for River's medical bills. And yeah, even early on in the story, it really does play out as rather tragic and sad. The worst part is that you're seeing all this backwards, from John at River's grave and him saying he's not going to let River die even though we already know what's going to happen. It can really hit a nerve and show early on just how much he cared for her, while also showing that things may not have been the best between them, with John constantly trying and, more often than not, failing to understand River, while River, due to her disability, isn't able to convey her emotions in a way to make John understand how she's feeling. But trust me, the real feels are yet to come. After a small incident with some olives, we then cut to a bookstore with John and some of his friends, where we get one of my favorite scenes from the game.
Just because she struggles to express it doesn't mean she doesn't feel anything. She's still there, right? Sometimes you just have to have faith that she cares. That's pretty difficult to do day in and day out. I know.
See, Isabel was diagnosed and, quote-unquote, helped at an earlier age, while River wasn't diagnosed too much later in life. As such, Isabel comes off as more normal and fitting in, while River acts more strange and peculiar. What's fascinating about it is, it keeps the story from becoming a wishy-washy, I want to be normal kind, while I think tackling upon a rather interesting issue. Isabel is able to act normal, which works out well for her, yet she oftentimes feels unhappy because she has to hide what she considers to be the real her. River, on the other hand, can still be who she truly wants to be, is a bit happier, but not quite so, since there's always a part of her that wants to be normal, thus creating an interesting conflict between ignorance and knowledge. Now, while some would say knowledge and normality is ideal, then why do we see so many adults stress about the real world, as opposed to a carefree child enjoying the world without knowing the darker side of it? River is fully able to embrace what she is, and is able to enjoy things, no matter what they are, and not care what people think. Which I'm with Isabel on this. I can be very jealous of at times. Though, am I saying that it'd be better if all people were more like River? Not really. As Isabel also points out, she does also feel sorry for her. To that I say, it is so hard to try to find a balance of both, a way of not ignoring the realities of the world, and yet fitting in, while also keeping our uniqueness and true selves so we can be the people who we want to be and yet be happy. It's like Sunny Meadows said in the My Little Pony fanfiction, Keepers of Discord, and And for those of you not aware, yes, I am a fan of My Little Pony, and I even read some of its fanfiction. While it might be a show aimed more at a younger audience, it's still a good show that has a lot an adult can get into and enjoy, along with how they like Last Airbender or Gravity Falls. Yet, I'm also not just gonna blurt it out loud in public and rub it in some guy's face about how much I relate to Pinkie Pie. But back to the quote from the fanfic, chaos and order go together like oil and water. We need order to have a stable life, but we need a little bit of chaos to make that life interesting. However, a lot of chaos is just a big mess. Well said. Come to think of it, some of my other favorite types of stories are about an Aspie and a Normie in one way or another, bonding, interacting, and growing off each other much like River and John here do. However, when you have a story all about abnormal characters...
Function, whereas I, on the other hand, just irritate the spit out of everyone.
Yeah, another time. Which, speaking of, it turns out the word is never actually spoken throughout the game. And even when it seems like Eve's about to say it, it's like, nope, you have to interpret it or look it up yourself. So, don't get me wrong, there's still a lot here that keeps River from being a closed autistic character, like with the word neurotypical being thrown around, and quite therapy, as well as mention to a famous Asperger's syndrome doctor by the name of Tony Antwood, who wrote numerous books about Asperger's syndrome. Yet, much like this one scene where you have to answer a question about anamorphers, the only time where mind control aliens work cool, you still kinda have to look stuff up to understand it, which is either incredibly, annoying, or it's really clever humor. Though, speaking of incredibly, unlike this from said movie...
I got tested once to see if I had Asperger's disease. Tests weren't definitive.
I find myself not as turned off that the game didn't confirm River as autistic. Still annoys me a little, but one part is that unlike Oscar, I find myself liking River. She's faulty, sure, but she also has her charm, personality, hopes and dreams, and other little quirks that make her a character. She's not just someone you're supposed to like and sympathize with only because she's autistic, but because she's someone worth getting invested into.
I wish it were you in the building instead of him.
I mean, they're children's books. What's wrong with reading children's books? They're comforting.
You then jump back a little further to River and John in high school years, and is it just me, or did I first thought that they were in elementary school at this part? I don't know, but nonetheless, this is their high school years, where John first meets River. And this is the part where we get to learn about what the game had been building up to as John supposedly did to River that was horrible in their childhood. See, at some point, John wanted to stand out more, and to do that, he was challenged by his best friend to ask the most oddball girl in school out. In this case, River, whom John was more or less only attracted to because of the Asperger's syndrome. Yeah, and that's kind of it. Well, at least that's it for the moment and all I can say without spoilers. But I mean, I'm not saying John's not a bit of an for this little stunt at River's expense, but for what the game was building it up to be, I guess I was expecting a little more. I'm not saying it was right of him, and he definitely does get some of the hate the game gives him, but he was just a teenager. Teenagers do dumb things. Besides, he got what was coming to him when he thinks River stood him up on the date, only to find out that she was watching the movie with him. And hey, he did end up marrying her, and he showed that he had grown and matured and even apologized for this when he was older. The marriage never necessarily felt perfect, but I wouldn't say it was terrible. I'll get more into that later. We then get to John's childhood where... No, the game's not broken, but it appears the machine Neil and Eve are using is. But hey, that's what you get when you buy from China. Yeah, I'm worse than Neil. Still, even with all this, Eve believes they have enough memory to take John to the moon. To do this, they return to the start, or would it be end, but either way, they proceed to set John's desire to go to the moon by... Okay, what's this game rated? Anyways, after you solve this puzzle, John should have been sent to the moon, but you're only to find out that nothing's changed. And no matter what Eve and Neil do some rather desperate and, dare I say, hilarious scenes, without John's childhood memory, they can't get anywhere. So they call it a day and hope some sleep will fix it, all while John could die at any moment. So the next day, we get a rather emotional scene between Eve and Lily, where they talk about what will happen to Lily when this is all over. And then we hear from Neil that he found out John was given some beta blockers when he was a child. The amnesia tool, if you will, for this story. With this new knowledge, Eve and Neil reason that with some kind of stimuli, they can awaken John's early memories. And then thinking back to the smell of roadkill in John's childhood memory, they figure with the squirrel they killed on the way over, they can awaken John's childhood memories. So, all they have to do is get the dead squirrel, hold it to John's nose, and away they go. And then away they go. Again, the comedy. Though I wonder if this is going where I think it is. What? Yeah, I know what's going to happen, but I'm assuming a lot of you don't. Though with that said, I think I am going to end this video here. Hey, the review isn't over. I'll upload the spoiler ending later once I give you people a chance to experience this game for yourself. While it doesn't have the thrilling action as something like Pokemon or the wonderful replay value of Undertale, To the Moon is able to stand on its own grounds just with its immersive story, amazing graphics, simply beautiful soundtrack, characters you'll get invested into almost from the get-go, and one of the best stories you'll see in any medium. And if you really don't think playing this game is your thing, then definitely at least check out some of the Let's Plays. But until I go into spoilers, I am AJ, and see you next time.